bust of Nefertiti, now in Berlin. Thutmose III vase, now in Munich. Nicholas II. Alexandra. We had everything in this picture but her. Nicholas's crown. We had that. We had this egg and maybe a dozen altogether. My name is Jack Herman, and this is my story. In 1978, I discovered that I had ancient artifacts in my possession when I was just a little kid. They came in a duffel bag from World War II. It was discovered that I recognized some articles in the In Search Of series narrated by Leonard Nimoy, and in this particular instance it was on the In Search Of Troy. It didn't hit me immediately after I saw the program, but hours later things started to materialize. And I wrote a letter to the Archaeological Institute in Athens, Greece, explaining that, dear sir, I have reason to believe that I had in my possession artifacts Heinrich Schliemann found while uncovering the cities of Troy. This is April 29, 1978, that I wrote this. It is my belief that all these artifacts have been missing since World War II. I am positive of one wire bracelet, gold, one necklace, description following, and 3 sets of earrings. And then there's a few things that I was uncertain about. But eventually that letter found its way to Berlin. Just checking my notes here. And in Berlin, the curator there, Dr. Klaus Goldman, over the next 6 months, Goldman and I exchanged correspondence. And I'm sure that if he didn't think that I had any value in the contents of my messages, it wouldn't have continued for such a long time. Well, that came to an end, again, 6 months later, and because I had moved so many times, and now I'm living in Pennsylvania at this time, and this all happened when I was a little kid in Los Angeles. And it came to an end when he offered me, let's say, a finder's fee for something I didn't have, which was it was quite a traumatic moment back then, and I pretty much everything got shelved. Luckily, I hung on to all this stuff because in October, a family member had a stroke, and it was going to be what I felt a situation where he might need some help. And I'm on Social Security, and financially monetary help just isn't available, but I have this story. And a couple more setbacks when I tried to get this story out there, and which led me into a 6-month investigation. And I found a lot of stuff that we had. there is so much to tell, so please stick with me. I think you'll enjoy it when we finally get to some sort of an end here. In June of 1978, I wrote to Goldman. So I believe that through hypnosis I could reveal about everything just about everything there is for me to remember. And since I got this computer, I've been able to do a lot of investigation. One thing that I can do well is investigate. And what I found through my investigation, which really started in depth in November, is not only did I have ancient artifacts from the civilization of Troy, but in that duffel bag was also the bust of Nefertiti that I played with when I was a kid. Somewhere in more than one duffel bag was the Thutmose the third vase, which in the beginning of this video. Eventually, over a period of time, we ended up with the family effects of Nicholas II Romanov. We had his uniforms, we had his sword, and I can tell you secrets about the sword that I found on the Antiques Roadshow. Maybe we'll get into that. Picture of Alexander Romanov. We had everything in that picture but her, in a container, a metal container. It was a family container. It was a strange container. It was it just looked un-American. It just looked like it was something different. We had Nicholas II's crown. We had that crown that has the nearly 5,000 diamonds. In fact, that I believe is called a spinel on top of it. When I was a kid, I pushed that down into the center of the crown. I smashed it in. I bent it into the center of the crown. I found that two Russian scientists thought that the weight of that spinel, if that is a correct word for it, caused it to sag. That's not true. I pushed it down in. We had not only the memory of Asimov egg here in the first of the video, we had about a dozen eggs, and there's probably about maybe another half dozen to a dozen more that are very vague in my mind, but things that keep coming back and shadowing my memory. Nevertheless, how did we end up with all this stuff? Well, this is what I've come up with and what I've found. Everybody probably, most people remember the story of the Band of Brothers, Easy Company. Well, my uncle Vern was 101st 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, like Easy Company, but he was Item Company. And before he passed, in a couple of mentions through his life, he had said that he earned the Legion of Merit, which you can only get if you in a leadership role. And he said a battlefield promotion to second lieutenant. Well, that sounds about right for that award. He also said that in his way of expressing himself that he pretty much lost all of that the next day. Well, I remember his uniform in Foot Locker. I remember a brooch in there. I thought it was a woman's brooch. It wasn't until a few months ago I accidentally ran across the Legion of Merit, and from what I remember, with everything else, he still had the Legion of Merit in his possession. I am the custodian of his Bronze Star. When it was displayed in my grandparents' house, there was a Silver Star as well. but the Legion of Merit was never displayed. It was in the footlocker. You know, how did he get it? I found records that show that the Monument's men were at Berchtesgaden, where Goering had 3 trainloads of worldly possessions, European treasures that were taken from all the countries that they had overran. So this is what I've come up with. There's no other way we could have ended up with all this stuff, and by some imagination of my own, I figure that we came up with, probably by today's values in our garage, maybe $2 billion worth of precious items and artifacts. I'll try to break it down at some point. But I believe the Monument's men, when my uncle still had command, instructed my uncle to secure particular items before the support troops came into Berchtesgaden. I believe that the only way he could have done this is to take it out of the area. What we eventually ended up with was probably 2 troop carriers worth of crates, most of those being German crates, with Excelsior in there. The reason why I know they were German crates is because the hinges had stampings on there with the German eagle, I believe is the bird, and some German lettering in there stamped on the hinges. Nevertheless, I believe they instructed Verne, Lieutenant Stewart, to secure these items, which I believe he did, commandeered as many as 2 personnel carriers, and sent the stuff back to the rear lines. Because he was not an authority on antiquities or anything else. So how could he select these personal items, let alone find them? And I think that the Monument's men found them and directed them as to what to do with these. Again, how did we end up with this stuff? Well, I think all this stuff got taken back to the rear lines and eventually went into storage. Now, with the Monument's men, is popular today that 800,000 items were collected, and a lot of hard work was went through to try to send the stuff back to the direction in which it originally came from, where the Nazis had hoarded this stuff. In 1945, President Truman wrote a directive to the Monument's men, which outraged them, the leadership there, which in response the Wiesbaden Manifesto was created, thrown back at Truman and his administration, saying that there was no good that could there was nothing good that could be developed by sending back. At that point, we only have history tells us it was 202 paintings. Well, if we ended up with that, what we ended up with, which was Nefertiti, Thutmose vase, the Romanov crown jewels, or the Russians' crown jewels, the Romanov personal effects, was that I believe these things were also sent with the paintings. And there was the feeling back in the day, back in that part of the century, was that out of all these hundreds of thousands of items that were stolen, the only one who could really appreciate that were the world leaders. The let's say the United States, England, and France. as far as Europe concerned, a lot of those other countries were not still fully developed, or they had ties to part of the whole problem that gets us where we're at today. So I believe what happened was, when Truman's administration came to an end in 1953, and the Republican Party was elected as Dwight D. Eisenhower being the president, that at some point somebody calls the administration and says, what do you want us to do with all these crates that were left over from the previous administration? And without anybody doing any real investigation and looking into these things, I believe what they found was my uncle's name on tags on these some individual pieces that were, which they were all related to each other through the rest of the identification. And that somebody must have said, why don't you just send it back to where it came from? Well, at this point, now we're years down, records are lost. The only name that they've got is my uncle's. After the war, my uncle, it took some time for him to settle down. And so the government then contacts my grandfather, my uncle's father, and says, we have all these crates down at the train depot. You need to come down and pick them up. And I don't know how long that took before we filled up a 2-bay garage to where my grandfather, who used to back the car in so he could pull straight out, was his habit, that there was very little room for his working environment, where his tool bench was, and the car, for all these crates. And my brother and I used to get into all these crates when they'd go for more crates, or we were old enough to take care of ourselves, you know, being 7, 8 years old. They'd be going for an hour or two. We'd get into as much as we could, and we found a lot of stuff. We had, as far as all these crates, we had a lot of Romanov stuff. And I'll make a statement right here. If you look around the United States, you'll find more Romanov II personal items than you will find in any other country of the world. The Bolsheviks did not sell those items because the Germans found them, and most likely all over Europe, because the Romanovs, as I did under my investigation, they shipped this stuff out when they lost their seat of control. And it obviously went all over Europe. And there was a lot of, let's say, if you want to call label a Faberge Egg a treasure, well, at $10 million minimum, that is quite a treasure. I believe that the Germans found a lot of Romanov stuff and hidden treasures as far as the eggs in the Summer Palace, which I believe was in Crimea, which has been in the news lately too. And one of the reasons why we ended up with so much personal stuff, we had autographed pictures to each other of the Romanov family. We had pictures of all the kids. Although the kids didn't, they were only lived to be very young age, so there wasn't a lot of pictures, but cumulatively with all the kids and the whole family, we had a lot of pictures. We had a lot of personal jewelry. There's a site out there that claims to have Romanov stuff, and I don't doubt it. Some of that stuff looks real familiar. But how did they get it? The answer to that was there was a central dispersing place, and that was my grandfather's garage in Los Angeles. Now, how did we lose it? Well, it's kind of like this. About the third time my brother and I had found the stash of wine, which I believe was Romanov special vintage, we got tanked, and we were only about 7 or 8 years old. Being a fifth generation Mormon, I didn't go over very well in the family when my brother and I were trying to be less intoxicated than we were while we were out playing in the yard after sneaking into the wine. So my grandmother called these relatives, the relatives that I believe had taken Nefertiti when my grandmother never knew Nefertiti was in the garage. There's a garage that's pretty much my grandfather's territory, and the house was my grandmother's. And Nefertiti was in a duffel bag, and, along with some Troy artifacts that I believe was in there, and Thutmose III. So she calls them up, because they were flea market people. I'm a flea market person, nothing wrong with that. I've been picking for 20 years or so. But she calls them up and tells them to clean out the garage. And through the next few years, months and into the years, we hear about them complaining that they had to rent a big truck, had to take all this stuff. They had complaining about how they had to categorize everything or put things together. But through the years, the next several months, which turned out to be just a few years, and there were stories that trickled out about the egg. Some people connected with Reader's Digest, and I've located and found that I believe it's Lila Atchison Wallace is one of the owners, her and her husband, of Reader's Digest, and she ended up with some eggs. So obviously, gee, I wonder where they got those. So that's how part of where I'm leading with this. But just talking about it doesn't prove a thing. But being descriptive, telling secrets that only a curator would know, or somebody who has handled these items, should eventually prove that my story is factual. And I have a lot of information on a lot of pieces, and the Memory of Azov egg is one of them. I got a lot of stuff. Matter of fact, I can't even see doing this in 1 or 2 videos. It's going to be longer than that, so I don't know if you want to stick with me or not, but you'll probably need a beverage or 2. But I don't even know where I'm at now. So all this stuff disappeared. And there's been, it was one until I was coming up on about 13 years old that these stories were fed back to my grandmother. My grandfather had passed. He passed about 2 or 3 years after this stuff disappeared, after the garage was cleaned out. And my grandmother would get these calls from this family that took this stuff. And she would relay this over her shoulder to the listening audience, was happened if we happened to be there. earlier we lived there with my grandmother, and then now we're not. We're living half a mile away. And one day we're getting this call, and I think it was about people in connection with the Reader's Digest wanting to buy this egg. And I don't remember what the price was. We thought, what kind of an egg is worth that kind of money? I never knew what a Faberge egg was until, yes, after I became an adult. But anyway, there was a time when my mother, it finally hit her that I finally convinced her that we had all this stuff in the garage, and my grandmother had disposed of it through them. To give you an idea of where we're at right here, if we go back to the beginning of the video, some secrets about Nefertiti is she fell over inside a duffel bag a few times, and she actually she damaged her right ear. I believe through my research is that the Metropolitan Museum in New York was the agent for the auction of Nefertiti, the one that we had. And the last two bidders were Germany and Egypt, who wanted it back since 1912. Well, the truth is that Hitler made a second bust, and when the original disappeared during the Second World War, Germany put that one up on display, the fake one. And I found reference to the fact that some people believe that it disappeared. Well, here I am. I'm here to back that up in a lot of ways. So there's this auction going on. I believe it was just before I turned 13, so it was in the early 60s now. Finally, Egypt bails out because they don't want to pay that much for a copy of the bust of Nefertiti, because they want the real one that's over in Berlin. Well, the whole time, Berlin knows that that is the real one in the United States that they're bidding on, because they had sent an agent over to check it out, take pictures of it. In fact, on Nefertiti itself, there was, right up in here, there was a very shallow relief of a cobra. That also broke off. And I had that many years in a wooden nail bucket in a garage. And a lot of people were squawking, looking for those parts long after she got sold and went away. And I knew where they were the whole time. And I didn't know the whole story, didn't know how any monetary values of the exchange, I didn't know anything. I was still pretty young. Nevertheless, she fell over in a bag a few times and her right ear got broken. Not very bad, but damaged. And I remember hearing that they made a repair on her right ear in Germany, and the story was the curator accidentally knocked her over and broke the ear, and then they made a repair. Well, that's not a very documented historical point in history that I've been able to find, but that was the time that they got Nefertiti back, because pieces of the ear or whatever, ear didn't completely break off. I think maybe some of it was molded into place. Maybe the repair was more simple. I remember that it was loose at the bottom right here. And there's two pictures that I've been able to pick up, a 1912 black and white and a current picture side by side showing the right side of the face here, and you can see clearly where the ear was repaired. I haven't found any evidence of that. Probably they do have that in Berlin and the Society for the Advancement of Egyptian Antiquities knows all about it, but that is just not common knowledge as far as I know. But nevertheless, that did damage it. What is very unique about Nefertiti, she probably has my DNA all over her headpiece there, because picking that up, it was like picking up heavy sandpaper. Man, I remember wearing my fingers off, just sliding, trying to drag her out of the bag and putting her back in. She's 44 pounds, and I was a little kid, but I'd get her out. The way her neck is, if you get a side profile, get into a wiki site and take a look and enlarge that, and you'll see that the way her neck is designed, it was very easy for me to just lay her head over into my lap, over my leg, and it wouldn't even touch my leg because of the way it's designed, and I would gaze into that face. I used to spend a lot of time looking into the face of Nefertiti, and that one eye was scary as hell at times. You just couldn't look at it because it was human. Or inhuman. There was something special about that. More I wanted to ramble about that. Let's get on to the Thutmose, the third vase. In a large photograph, which you can still find on the same wiki site, if you follow the stem on the bottom of the vase to the bottom to the bottom of the base, you'll see a yellow ribbon of glass color. It follows the stem straight down, and it leans towards the right. And on the top of the base, that narrow base there, there's a little black mark right there where the yellow ends. I can say that without a doubt that little black mark is razor sharp, because I took this thumb and I shaved the skin off my thumb down to where I didn't want to make it bleed, but I stopped and I thought, I'm going to do this because I want to remember this vase forever. I don't ever want to forget it, because I know for some reason someday this vase just might disappear, because it was my favorite thing. Made like a glass out of a marble, and it was heavy. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough and heavy enough for a little kid. And that is in the Munich Museum right now. That, again, we had other pieces of Thutmose III. They are now housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, I contacted the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I think it was in December of this year, 14. And I said, I just want to be your friend. I said, all I'm trying to do is get the truth out. I noticed that there are $4 million in the red last physical statement in 13. I guess, yeah. And the most visited area in the Metropolitan just happens to be the Egyptian wing. Hello. And I said, all I want you to do is tell the truth. And we can get you out of the red. because in the Egyptian wing there, and I have photographs of this, I'll pop them up here at some point. There's a lot to tell you here. Is there were Thutmose the third wives. He had, I believe, 4 wives. They had these golden sandals. They're burial sandals. They're flat. Nobody ever walked in them except me. I was telling the Metropolitan there were several things that I left my mark on, and that was the Thutmose the third wives sandals should have, one of them should have scrape marks on the bottom, because I think it was a larger pair that I stepped and I slid across the linoleum, maybe onto the concrete in the garage. So it's got scrape marks on the bottom. There were 3 sets of those sandals, and each one is slightly distinguishable from the other with a little ornamentation on the top. The one pair that fit better, but they were not comfortable at all, I actually was able to walk in them, and I think I was wearing my socks on at the time, and I'm just a little kid, I'm not 10 years old. And walking in something that's perfectly flat, designed to stay flat, well, they get bent, especially if they're metal. And I'm telling the Metropolitan this through the director in the Antiquities Department. I'm also telling her there's some other Thutmose the third items there. One happens to be 6 sets of earrings. These are the earrings I was trying to tell Goldman about. And the one interesting trait about these earrings is they're like they're round, and they have this device that locks right into a channel. Out of all those earrings, only one of them actually worked, was fully articulated. And everything else was old and jammed, but still in pretty good shape. There was a frosted mug very similar to the marbled one, only it was a frosted glass, and it appears to be broken on the outside. And we'll go over that at some point. But if you look at it at the light, when you hold it up to the light and have the light transmit from the outside into the inside, it's not broke. Matter of fact, those lines, they just disappear. Well, okay, let's move on to to Nicholas II Romanov. We had his uniforms. We found that he has kind of like a bandolier. You'll see that in some old photographs, and I think I have some in my computer here. And they look like they're for ammunition. Well, I have you know that they were cigars that were in there. We had his Order of St. Andrew. And he had several other things too. And the oh, there's so much to tell you. We had his crown. I believe we already talked about that. Alexandra. We had everything in that picture that she's wearing but her. The only thing we didn't have. I've made this video so many times I don't know if I'm repeating myself. This is just driving me crazy here. The Asimov egg, the memory of Asimov. I dropped that on the pavement in concrete. I bent the forecastle, which is that little piece that sticks forward, but usually there's a sail on there. Bent it totally to the right. And there's some other minor damage on there. But what is not shown anywhere in the memory of Asimov egg is the impact on the base, the very base. On the very base, on the right side of that little disc, should show the impact zone on the base to the pavement. Secondly, at one point, because we didn't believe any of this stuff was worth any value, we thought they were all Hollywood props, since Hollywood is just down the road 15 minutes from where we live. I decided, well, this stuff is just, they're so numerous, nobody's going to miss a little bit of damage. I decided to dig a diamond out of the Asimov egg, the exterior. And I was reluctant to do it till I noticed that there was already one diamond missing. So then I took one out. Only I lost it as soon as I took it out. So I took another one out. And now I know there's three. And remember, I kept looking over and over and over on this egg to try to see how many diamonds were now missing. And I kept losing count. There may have been two that were missing when I took my two out. And I took it out to observe and take it out in the sun to see if there's a brilliance like the diamonds would understand. But I also understand that they cut diamonds differently back in the day. Romanovs were expired in 1918 or 19. So their diamonds are a lot different. I've made a lot of claims to where I thought their diamonds, a lot of the stuff, especially Josephine's crown, which we had, was also a fake diamond. But I'm beginning to think that maybe they weren't fake diamonds, since it may have been Alexander Nicholas's father or grandfather that bought that for Josephine. I can't remember how that happened, but we had that one too. So I can say, as far as Asimov egg, there are at least 3 diamonds missing. Now, by coincidence, remember Lila Atchison Wallace had bought an egg. Malcolm Forbes ended up with, I believe, 10 eggs that he sold to a Russian billionaire. They're now all in Russia. There's more information I know about other eggs too, and maybe we'll get to that at some point. I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep yet. Get another beverage. But anyway, there stands to be a lot of money to be made, not only by the Metropolitan Museum, if they come clean, the Berlin Museum, which houses Nefertiti, and also the Thutmose III. People will go in and look at these things again. They'll look at them a little bit closer. They just won't look at it as a piece of antiquity that just came out of a tomb. They'll look at it a little bit differently, that some little kid had this and was messing around with it and did different things, and this was one of the things that he had. We had suits of armor. I found a jeweled rifle in the Walters Museum. I can't remember is that's in Cleveland or not, or where exactly that is, or Baltimore, but nevertheless, that jeweled Cossack rifle, that was ours too. We had it. In fact, those 2 rods that extend out the back in the receiver, the gold that was made out of was very brittle. There's 2 types of gold out there, people. It ain't all flat or shiny and bendable, malleable. There's gold out there that's very brittle. It's based on, I guess, on how the gold is processed. But these 2 rods, the one on the right side, I used to break small pieces off of that until the button that was on the exterior had not very long stem, whereas I left the other stem alone, and it was probably less than a foot, probably 10 inches with a loop all the way around. these rods used to work something on the inside. Not only did that flap open up on the butt piece, the butt plate, but my brother found something on the receiver that opened up too. I think the top hinges up. Now, Walter's probably never bothered to stick a light in there and investigate into one of those holes, one of these tube lights that can get in there. But I can say that I remember that something additionally can be explored and exposed on that rifle. I'm also thinking that that rifle, the Cossack type rifle, was also Nicholas II. It seemed that all came together at once. The Alexandra in the video early, I can tell you that gown, it's I believe they call it a train. The thing was real long. When nobody was looking, except my brother and I going through all this stuff, I took that whole gown out and laid it in the backyard lawn. We had a nice long lawn there, probably about 50 yards from the house to the fence. Probably felt like 50 yards, it was probably 100 feet, 150 feet, I don't know. But the gown pretty much took up half the length of the lawn. I can tell you that the gown was as they call it, a bone color or ivory, and that the brocade, the pieces, the highlights that are sewn onto it were gold with red and less black highlights. We had her crown. We had everything in that picture. When we went through everything and we found the one glove, we thought we lost the other glove. And we didn't want anybody to know we were digging through all this stuff, and we spent a long time trying to find that other glove before somebody else found it outside a container, knowing that we got in there, and we could never find it. Never knew what happened to it. Not until recently, and I found this photograph and saw that she only wore just one. You'll also notice in the photograph there are two bracelets that are identical, one on each side, and they're little round things that are locked on, however that goes. The fan, there were two fans that we had. I think we had that veil piece that comes down. Now here's the other thing about her crown. Since Russia got Nicholas's crown back, which is the crown jewels of Russia, the last one to wear, they also must have gotten her crown back too. And I'll tell you this, her crown has at least one, if not several, little suspended pearls that have been removed. If you look closely at the photograph from the wiki site, get that all blown up, you'll see that it's blurry in that second row, the row that's closest to the top of her head. It's because they're moving. Must have been quite a regal sight to see suspended pearls from her crown. But also notice that it's not being displayed at the Russian armory. Maybe you didn't get it back. But if you did, you're not displaying it because it's damaged, because those pearls are missing. Well, let me tell you something. The reason why those pearls are missing is because I don't believe they were real pearls. You see, I took a pearl off of I think it was a 12th century crown. We had a lot of crowns. And I noticed something different between the pearls felt so light on her crown. And I have to say that there were some awards that Nicholas wore too, which were paste, the jewelry term. which was knowledgeable by people, but I don't know if very many people knew that those pearls were fake. I looked up plastic. Plastic was invented about 1870. They gave it a name. I forgot what it was. It was kind of it was a light absorbing white material, and I remember ripping one of these off, pulling it from the crown, peeling the coating off and exposing this white interior, a solid piece, and sticking it in my mouth, and just who knows how long during the day until I got tired of that. But I had felt that I'd taken a pearl off this other crown, and I put it in my hand, and I could kind of feel the weight of that. And I always thought pearl was kind of like, you know, it's like a more like a stone than a crouton. And I think that's why I pulled them off. I was kind of upset that I didn't believe that they were real, and I kind of found that out. And the way we found that out is, if you look at her earrings in that picture, one of those earrings got damaged in the box when we were putting stuff back in. Somehow it got smashed. Maybe it got smashed by the hidden compartment that held the gold bars that were in the bottom of that case of Alexandra's. There were gold bars in there that were separated by like white linen. There was probably, I'd say on average, these sections of 9 gold bars, small gold bars. They were slightly larger than a fig Newton. So 9 gold bars, probably, if that was a number, or 8 or whatever. They probably represented a particular monetary value, the way they were set out into the bottom of this her case of all her. That was probably her what do they call it, the coronation outfit. So anyway, I found some fake pearls there. Gosh, there's so much to tell you. So I've also written to Scotland about their Monymusk reliquary. We had that. We had several reliquaries. We must have had a dozen or so. There's a few in at the Metropolitan Museum. Yeah, boy, did they end up with a lot of stuff. In the midst of a transmission with the Metropolitan, I'm telling them about stuff that I had. And the director there in the Antiquities, or Egyptian Antiquities, said, well, tell me a little bit about everything that you think that you had, and some significant little secret, I'll call it, about it. About the 4th transmission, stuff was coming in while I was sending stuff out to them. And the Egyptian curator says she no longer wants to have any more contact with me. Well, I can understand that, because several of the items that we had, which was Thutmose III, they have their provenance claiming that they've had it since about 1920, give or take a couple of years. Well, I know that not to be true, because I had these items in the mid-50s. And I'll present these pictures, and we'll go over that again. Getting tired of talking. This is the 3rd time I've made this recording, trying to get through on this. I don't know if I'll expect to have all this difficulty running out of my voice. Maybe I need a beverage. But I'm going to stop and play this back and see what we've got. We'll go from there.